Imagine checking into a hotel room, an Airbnb, or even your own apartment, only to realize later that you were never truly alone. Hidden lenses silently recording your most private moments, watching you when you thought you were safe. Tonight, we dive into 3 disturbing true hidden camera horror stories that will make you question every mirror, every smoke detector, and every corner of the room you thought was yours. The summer heat had started to fade when Julia decided to take a short trip out of town, hoping for a weekend of peace and solitude. She booked a small budget hotel, nothing fancy, just a place to rest while she explored the nearby hiking trails. The room looked ordinary enough when she checked in. Cream-colored walls, a double bed, and the usual amenities: a desk, a chair, and a television that hummed faintly even when turned off. At first glance, it was just another anonymous hotel room, but something about the silence felt heavier than it should. That night, after a long day of walking, she returned exhausted, kicked off her shoes, and fell onto the bed. As she scrolled through her phone, her eyes kept drifting to the corner of the ceiling, where the smoke detector blinked with a tiny red light. It was nothing unusual, yet the blinking felt timed, purposeful, like it was keeping rhythm with her every move. She tried to brush it off and eventually dozed off, only to wake in the middle of the night with a strange unease. The room felt colder, though the air conditioner hadn't been touched. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and caught sight of the same smoke detector. The light was no longer blinking in the slow, lazy pattern it had earlier. Now it pulsed quickly, erratically, as if it were responding to her movements. She tried to dismiss it, convincing herself it was just her nerves playing tricks in the darkness. The next morning, while packing her things for the hike, she glanced again at the detector. On a whim, she pulled a chair over and stood up to get a closer look. That's when she noticed something odd. An almost imperceptible dark circle inside the device, a lens glinting back at her. Her stomach twisted. She reached for her phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it directly at the detector. The reflection of glass confirmed her suspicion. Someone had placed a hidden camera inside. Panic set in as she tore through the room, searching for more. Behind the mirror above the dresser, she spotted another small hole drilled carefully through the back panel, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Her hands shook as she checked the alarm clock, the television, even the vent above the bathroom door. Each item felt like it could hold another secret, and the thought that she had been watched for hours, or even days, made her feel exposed in a way she couldn't put into words. She hurried to the front desk, clutching her bag and demanding answers, but the receptionist looked genuinely confused. He insisted no one else had access to her room and that the smoke detectors were standard issue. Yet the way his eyes darted to the manager's office suggested he knew more than he was letting on. Julia didn't stay to argue. She checked out immediately, heart pounding, and drove away without looking back. Knowing the feeling of being watched would follow her long after she left, Ryan was no stranger to Airbnb stays. He often traveled for work, and the convenience of renting entire apartments made his trips easier and more comfortable. When he booked a cozy 1-bedroom loft in a quiet neighborhood, he expected nothing more than a relaxing week after long meetings. The photos showed a modern, well-decorated space with warm lighting, a tidy kitchen, and large windows overlooking the street. When he arrived, everything matched the listing perfectly, and the host had even left a welcome note on the counter. It felt safe, welcoming, and private, the way temporary homes are supposed to. The first night passed without incident, but by the second evening, Ryan began to sense something wasn't right. He had set his bag on the kitchen table before heading out for dinner. But when he came back later, he noticed the bag had been moved slightly closer to the edge. He dismissed it as his own mistake. Maybe he had placed it there without realizing. Still, the thought lingered in the back of his mind as he went to bed. Around midnight, he was awoken by a faint clicking sound, like the soft whir of electronics starting up. He turned on the light but saw nothing unusual. The loft was quiet again, and he convinced himself it was just the refrigerator cycling. On the third day, while video calling a friend, Ryan's eyes wandered to a strange spot on the bookshelf across the room. A small black dot, no bigger than a pen tip, stood out against the white wood. Curious, he ended the call and went to inspect it. The closer he got, the more it resembled a lens. He pressed his finger against it, and his stomach dropped when he felt the cold, hard glass. With trembling hands, he pulled the shelf forward and discovered a hidden camera embedded in the back panel. His heart raced as the realization hit him someone had been watching. He searched the rest of the loft in a frenzy. A second camera was tucked inside the smoke detector in the bedroom, its lens carefully concealed. Another was hidden in the corner of the living room, disguised as part of a motion sensor. He felt violated, the sense of comfort and privacy shattered. Every moment he had spent in the loft, changing clothes, lying in bed, talking on the phone, could have been recorded. He immediately contacted Airbnb support, his voice shaking as he explained what he had found. They promised to investigate, but their calm, scripted responses only heightened his fear. He packed his belongings within minutes, his skin crawling at the thought that the host could have been watching him in real time. As he left, he noticed a car parked across the street with tinted windows, facing directly toward the loft. The engine was running, and though he couldn't see who was inside, he felt eyes following him until he disappeared around the corner. Angela was exhausted after a long road trip when she spotted a neon sign glowing faintly against the dark highway, a rundown roadside motel advertising cheap rooms. She hadn't planned on stopping, but the lure of sleep outweighed her unease about the building's shabby appearance. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of mildew, and the man behind the counter barely looked up as he handed her the key to room 12. The hallways were dimly lit, lined with peeling wallpaper, and the carpet was damp in places, giving the whole place a feeling of neglect. Still, all Angela wanted was a few hours of rest before continuing her journey in the morning. The room was exactly what she expected: dated furniture, faded curtains, and a musty odor clinging to the air. She dropped her bag on the chair and sank into the bed, noticing how the springs groaned under her weight. As she lay there, her eyes wandered across the room, and for a moment, she thought she saw something odd. The mirror on the wall opposite the bed seemed too large for such a small space, stretching nearly from floor to ceiling. She stared at it longer than she meant to, trying to shake off the odd sensation that it wasn't just reflecting her, but somehow concealing something more. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the building and every sound from outside set her on edge. Around midnight, Angela rolled over and noticed a faint glow in the corner of the mirror, as if a small red light blinked behind the glass. She sat up, heart thudding, and stared harder. The glow disappeared, but the image of it stuck in her mind. Deciding she was imagining things, she tried to settle back into bed, but her nerves wouldn't allow it. The next morning, as daylight poured in, she examined the mirror more closely. She pressed her palm against it and noticed it was colder than the rest of the wall. On instinct, she tapped against the glass, and the sound echoed strangely hollow, as if there was space behind it. A chill went through her spine. Gathering her courage, she leaned in and cupped her hands around her eyes to block the light, peering closer at the surface. That's when she saw it. A small circular lens positioned behind the mirror, barely visible unless you looked for it. Her stomach lurched as she stumbled back. Someone had been recording her. Fear surged through her, and she quickly gathered her belongings. When she stepped outside, she noticed something she hadn't paid attention to before. Room 12 was located at the far end of the building, right next to a locked door marked Maintenance. From the way the building was structured, it was clear that the space behind her mirror connected directly to that locked room. She didn't dare open it, but she knew that whoever had access to that space had been watching every guest who stayed there. The thought of how many people had unknowingly been filmed in that same room made her feel sick. Without stopping at the front desk, she left her key on the counter and walked quickly to her car, her hands trembling as she pulled onto the highway. Trying to outrun the invisible eyes that had been on her all night, Mark and his girlfriend Sophie had been together for 3 years when they decided to take a weekend getaway to celebrate her birthday. They found a charming countryside inn online, a place that promised rustic decor and quiet surroundings far from the noise of the city. When they arrived, the building looked every bit as cozy as the photos had suggested: wooden beams across the ceilings, old, fashioned furniture, and fireplaces that gave off a comforting glow. Their room was warm and inviting, with a king-size bed and a large mirror that stretched across the wall near the dresser. At first, they laughed about how romantic it felt, like something out of an old movie. The first night passed without incident, though Sophie mentioned that she had felt a strange draft in the room that didn't seem to come from the window. Mark dismissed it, teasing her about being overly sensitive. But the second night, things began to feel different. Sophie was brushing her hair in front of the mirror when she suddenly stopped, staring at her reflection with an uneasy expression. She asked Mark to come closer, pointing out how the glass seemed darker in certain areas, almost tinted. He leaned in and noticed it too. though at the time he thought it was just old glass or bad lighting. Later that evening, after Sophie fell asleep, Mark sat in bed scrolling through his phone. He glanced at the mirror and froze. He could have sworn he saw a faint flicker of movement behind the glass, like the shifting of a shadow. His pulse quickened as he set the phone down and stared, trying to convince himself he was imagining it. He approached the mirror and pressed his hand against it. The surface felt unusually cool, much colder than the rest of the room. Something about it didn't feel right. The next morning, curiosity got the better of him. When Sophie went downstairs for breakfast, Mark stayed behind and decided to test a theory he had read about one-way mirrors. He placed his fingertip against the glass. Normally, with regular mirrors, there would be a slight gap between the reflection and the real finger. But this time, his fingertip touched its reflection directly. His stomach dropped. That mirror wasn't just for reflection. It was designed to be looked through from the other side. Panic rushed over him as he scanned the edges of the wall. The placement of the mirror lined up perfectly with what could be an adjoining room or hidden space. He pressed his ear against the glass and thought he heard the faintest shuffle, like footsteps moving away. His mind raced with the realization that someone had been on the other side, silently watching everything. Every private moment he and Sophie had shared in that room had been observed. When Sophie returned, he quietly told her what he discovered. They didn't argue or debate. They packed their things in silence, both too shaken to stay another night. As they left the inn, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that someone might still be behind that mirror, watching them go with the same silent patience as before Daniel was on a business trip when he checked into a sleek modern hotel downtown. The room looked spotless, decorated in a minimalist style with clean lines, white sheets, and subtle lighting. He was used to traveling often, and nothing about the room struck him as unusual at first. The bed faced a flat-screen television mounted on the wall, and just above it was a smoke detector with a faint red light blinking in steady intervals. He barely gave it a second glance, assuming it was just another safety feature. After a long day of meetings, all he wanted was a shower and some rest. That night, while lying in bed, Daniel noticed something that unsettled him. The smoke detector's light seemed to blink differently when he moved. If he sat up, it blinked faster. When he lay back down, it slowed. He stared at it for several minutes, trying to convince himself he was imagining the pattern. To distract himself, he turned on the television, but even then, his eyes kept drifting upward to the small white device on the ceiling. Sleep came eventually, but not peacefully. He woke up more than once in the night with the distinct feeling of being observed, as though eyes were following his every shift beneath the sheets. The next morning, the unease hadn't left him. He decided to test the smoke detector, standing on a chair to get closer. At first it looked ordinary, plastic casing, a tiny vent for air circulation. But when he shone the flashlight from his phone into the opening, he froze. Inside, behind the mesh, was a tiny circular lens glinting back at him. His chest tightened as the truth hit him. It wasn't just a smoke detector. It was a hidden camera. Daniel climbed down quickly, his hands trembling, and began checking the room. He ran his fingers across the alarm clock, the lamp, even the air vent. His fear deepened when he noticed small pinholes in unusual spots, like the corner of the desk and near the bathroom door. They were positioned at angles that seemed intentional, as if someone had carefully chosen them to capture the entire room. A wave of nausea hit him as he thought about what might have been recorded already. Every private moment since he had walked into the room could have been watched by someone sitting safely behind a screen. He immediately called the front desk, demanding that someone come up. The manager arrived quickly, his polite smile faltering when Daniel showed him the detector. The man insisted he had no knowledge of it, and said it must have been installed by a previous guest. His words did little to calm Daniel, who couldn't shake the thought that the staff might be involved. He packed his things in a hurry, refusing to spend another second under that roof. As he wheeled his suitcase down the hallway, the manager kept apologizing, but Daniel barely heard him. The only sound echoing in his mind was the imagined click of a camera lens opening and closing. Capturing every secret moment he thought had been his alone, Clara had been searching for a new apartment after moving to a different city for work. The market was expensive, so when she came across a quaint basement unit offered by a friendly middle-aged landlord, she felt lucky. He greeted her warmly during the tour, explaining that he lived upstairs and liked to keep the place rented to quiet tenants. The apartment was small but cozy, with just enough space for her essentials. Clara signed the lease quickly, relieved to finally have a place she could call home. At first, everything seemed normal. The landlord was polite, occasionally asking if she needed anything, and Clara appreciated his attentiveness. But soon, his presence became unnerving. He appeared more often than she expected, sometimes knocking on her door late in the evening with excuses that seemed trivial. Once he claimed he had to check the water heater. Another time he insisted he needed to replace a light bulb in the hallway. Clara began to feel uneasy but brushed it off as him being overly cautious about the property. Still, she couldn't ignore how his eyes lingered on her apartment, as if he was studying it rather than maintaining it. One night, after taking a shower, Clara was brushing her hair when she noticed a faint clicking sound above her. Looking up, she saw the vent near the bathroom ceiling. It was dark inside, but she had the strange sensation of being watched. She pushed the thought aside, telling herself it was paranoia. Days later, while cleaning, she bumped into the wall near the living room outlet. To her surprise, the outlet plate moved slightly, not screwed in tightly like the others. Curious, she pulled it back and froze. Behind the thin plastic cover was a tiny lens, no bigger than the tip of a pen, pointed directly into the room. Her breath caught as the realization sank in. Heart racing, she searched the rest of the apartment. Another camera was hidden inside a smoke detector, one more behind a small hole drilled above her bed. Every corner where she thought she had privacy was compromised. The worst part was that the cameras were positioned to capture her most vulnerable moments. Changing clothes, sleeping, showering. Her stomach twisted with disgust as she imagined how long she had been filmed without knowing. She confronted the landlord the next morning, holding the outlet cover in her trembling hand. His reaction was unnervingly calm. He denied everything at first, saying she must have mistaken it for wiring, but the flicker in his expression betrayed him. Clara didn't argue. She knew she had to leave immediately. She packed her belongings as quickly as she could and contacted the police. But the thought of the landlord living right above her made every second inside the apartment feel dangerous. She couldn't escape the feeling that he was listening, maybe even watching her at that very moment through another hidden lens she hadn't yet discovered. When the police arrived at Daniel's hotel room, the atmosphere shifted from fear to a cold, clinical kind of dread. 2 officers and a technician entered, carrying cases of equipment, their faces stern and focused. Daniel explained what he had found in the smoke detector, pointing upward with a shaking hand. The technician brought out a small screwdriver, carefully removing the device from the ceiling. As the casing came apart, the room fell silent. Inside was not just a camera, but also a transmitter, evidence that the footage had been streamed elsewhere in real time. The officer holding it gave Daniel a sharp look, as if silently confirming his worst fears. They asked him to step outside while they continued searching. Daniel waited in the hallway, every second stretching into an eternity. Guests walked by, glancing at the scene with curiosity, unaware of the horror that had unfolded behind that hotel room door. After nearly half an hour, one of the officers emerged carrying a small box, filled with what they had collected. Another hidden camera disguised as a motion sensor, a bug in the alarm clock, and a suspiciously modified outlet cover. Each item seemed ordinary on its own, but together they painted a chilling picture. Someone had wired the room to monitor every move, every word, every private moment. Daniel followed them to the manager's office where the police questioned the hotel staff. The manager looked pale, his hands shaking as he tried to insist he had no idea what was going on. The officers weren't convinced. They asked for access to the hotel's security system and staff records. Meanwhile, Daniel sat quietly in the corner, watching the scene play out like something from a nightmare. He couldn't shake the thought that countless other guests may have stayed in that room, completely unaware they were being watched. The technician soon confirmed that the hidden devices had been active for months. Data logs revealed that they were transmitting to an external server. Whoever had set them up wasn't just recording for later. They were watching live, likely from somewhere nearby or possibly even abroad. The idea of a stranger monitoring his sleep, his conversations, his vulnerable moments, made Daniel's skin crawl. It was a violation that went far beyond invasion of privacy. It was predatory. One officer asked him if he wanted to file a formal statement, warning him that the investigation might take time and that arrests weren't guaranteed. Daniel agreed without hesitation. His voice trembled as he described the blinking light, the strange feeling of being watched, and the discovery of the lens inside the smoke detector. Every detail he recounted seemed to confirm the larger horror. that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of something systematic and deeply disturbing. When the questioning was over, Daniel left the hotel under police escort. The flashing red and blue lights outside cast eerie patterns against the walls, making the entire building look sinister. As he walked away, the weight of what he had uncovered pressed heavily on him, and he realized that the room he had chosen for rest had instead become a crime scene where his privacy had been stolen piece by piece. When the detective handed Emily the small black USB drive, her palms grew damp. It had been discovered during the sweep of her rented cabin, tucked behind the television set where the cables met the wall. At first, she thought it was just a forgotten piece of technology left by a previous guest, but the officer's grim expression told her otherwise. Emily sat at the police station later that evening, her stomach twisted in knots as the technician inserted the drive into a computer. The screen lit up with folders, each one neatly labeled with dates spanning several months. The detective clicked on the most recent one, and the video feed began to play. Emily's heart dropped. There she was on the screen, sitting on the couch of the cabin just hours after checking in. The angle was slightly elevated, like it had been filmed from a corner of the room. She watched herself unpack her bag, humming softly, completely unaware of the camera's presence. Her hands shook as the video continued, showing her moving through the cabin, bending down, changing clothes. Every moment was documented in chilling silence. The technician clicked through more files, and each folder revealed a new guest. Families, couples, even children, every occupant of the cabin had been recorded. The videos captured everything: laughter, arguments, private conversations, and intimate acts meant only for the safety of four walls. Some files were hours long, suggesting that the cameras had been streaming constantly without pause. Emily could hardly breathe as she realized she was just one name in a growing list of victims. The detective paused on a file from 3 weeks earlier. The footage was darker, grainier, but it clearly showed a couple sleeping. Then, at one point, a shadow moved across the frame, not from the guests, but from behind the camera itself. Someone had entered the cabin in the dead of night, walking through the living room while the couple slept soundly in the next room. Emily gasped as the figure leaned closer to the camera, adjusting it slightly before disappearing into the hallway. The detective froze the video, pointing out the blurry outline of a man's face half hidden by a hood. Emily's thoughts spiraled. Whoever was behind this wasn't just setting up cameras and leaving them. He had been inside the cabin while people stayed there, adjusting his equipment, making sure it captured exactly what he wanted. The idea of him standing in the same place she had sat only hours ago made her skin crawl. She hugged herself tightly, struggling to hold back tears as the officers exchanged looks that confirmed the seriousness of what they were seeing. They copied the drive for evidence, locking the original away in a sealed bag. One officer tried to reassure her, saying they would track down the person responsible, but his tone carried little certainty. Emily left the station feeling hollow, every sound and shadow on the street suddenly magnified. She couldn't stop imagining that somewhere out there, a stranger had been watching her life like a show, replaying her most private moments with the click of a mouse. The news broke only a week after Daniel, Clara, and Emily had given their statements. Local authorities held a press conference confirming that hidden cameras had been found in multiple hotels, rental cabins, and private apartments across 3 different cities. What shocked everyone was the discovery that all the devices were connected to the same network, funneling the footage to a secure server, hidden behind layers of encryption. The case quickly escalated from isolated incidents to what investigators described as a coordinated operation. Victims who thought they were alone in their experiences realized they were part of something much larger and far more sinister. Dozens of people came forward with similar stories. Some had suspected nothing until police knocked on their doors, while others remembered the unease of blinking lights, oddly placed vents, or strange shadows behind mirrors. Each testimony added another piece to the puzzle. The detectives revealed that thousands of hours of footage had been stored and, worse, shared across private forums on the dark web. The thought that strangers around the world had access to those intimate recordings turned the victims' stomachs. It was no longer just a violation of privacy, it was exploitation on a global scale. Forensic teams traced the operation back to a group of landlords, rogue hotel employees, and anonymous technicians who had sold and installed the cameras. The USB drives, smoke detectors, mirrors, and outlet covers had been customized for surveillance, and some even came from companies advertising spy equipment online. The investigation uncovered receipts, shipping logs, and online discussions where the perpetrators bragged about their ability to watch people without being caught. Every detail painted a picture of premeditation, a deliberate choice to turn ordinary living spaces into cages of observation. Victims struggled to cope with the revelations. Clara could barely sleep, convinced her new apartment was also compromised. Daniel had nightmares of blinking red lights, waking up drenched in sweat. Emily avoided hotels altogether, her trust in any unfamiliar space shattered. Many others expressed the same fear, that every room outside their own homes might be another trap. The psychological toll was immense. Counselors began working with the victims, though healing seemed impossible when the digital evidence of their private lives might still be circulating online. The detectives insisted progress was being made. Some of the suspects were identified and taken into custody, though many remained at large. International agencies were contacted to track the distribution of the footage, but the dark web proved slippery, a labyrinth where anonymity thrived. For every server they shut down, 2 more seemed to emerge. Yet, the most unsettling discovery came when one technician revealed that some of the cameras had not only transmitted video, but also live audio. Every whispered secret, every vulnerable confession, every sound behind closed doors had been captured. The realization left everyone with the same chilling thought: this wasn't just about hidden cameras or stolen recordings. It was about the terrifying ease with which privacy could be erased, turning safe spaces into stages for unseen audiences who never stopped watching. The storm of revelations had left the public shaken, and the victims felt as though their lives had been pulled into a dark spotlight they had never asked for. The investigation was far from over, but one thing had become painfully clear: the danger of hidden cameras was not confined to isolated motels, creepy landlords, or questionable Airbnb hosts. It was a growing epidemic, a silent invasion spreading through the very spaces people trusted to be private. The truth weighed heavily on everyone who had been involved. What began as suspicions, a blinking light, a strange reflection, an outlet that didn't quite fit, had spiraled into something that exposed a sinister industry thriving in the shadows. Emily, Daniel, and Clara all tried to move forward, but their lives were marked by permanent scars. Emily couldn't shake the image of herself on those video files, replayed endlessly by faceless strangers. She left her rental cabin behind, breaking her lease and moving in with a friend just to feel safe at night. Daniel developed a habit of checking every ceiling mirror and device in every hotel he entered, no matter how expensive or well-reviewed. Sleep no longer came easily. For Clara, the betrayal cut deeper than fear. Knowing her landlord, the very person entrusted with her home, had installed cameras, left her with a lingering mistrust of people in positions of authority. Meanwhile, the investigation stretched on. Police departments collaborated with cybersecurity experts to track servers and hidden networks where the stolen footage was sold and traded. Some perpetrators were caught, though not nearly enough. A few hotel employees confessed to being paid to install devices, while others claimed ignorance. Every arrest seemed to uncover another layer, another lead pointing to how widespread the practice really was. The case wasn't just about voyeurism, it had grown into a multi-million-dollar underground business. The idea that a stranger could set up cameras and profit from someone else's vulnerability was horrifying, and the public demanded new laws and harsher penalties. But despite the progress, the most haunting reality remained: much of the footage was already out there, impossible to erase completely. Once uploaded, it took on a life of its own. Victims lived with the knowledge that someone, somewhere, might be watching their most intimate moments years later. That violation could never be undone. It wasn't just about being recorded. It was about having their humanity stolen and treated as entertainment. In the aftermath, awareness campaigns began to spread. Online forums shared tips on how to spot hidden lenses, how to test mirrors, and what signs to look for in smoke detectors or outlets. Travelers carried flashlights and apps designed to detect hidden devices. What had once been dismissed as paranoia became a necessary precaution. The phrase, "check your room," became a mantra for anyone staying away from home. Some felt empowered by the knowledge, but many lived in quiet dread, realizing how fragile the illusion of privacy truly was. The victims, though shaken, wanted their voices heard. By sharing their stories, they hoped others could avoid what they had endured. Emily gave an interview where she spoke through tears about the USB drive and the endless folders of victims. Daniel described the terror of realizing the blinking smoke detector had been watching him all along. Clara urged people to trust their instincts when something felt off, because her own hesitation had nearly cost her peace of mind forever. Their courage in reliving the trauma created ripples, forcing the world to acknowledge that this was not rare, not isolated, and not something that could be ignored. The final conclusion was chilling in its simplicity: no place is automatically safe. Hotels, rentals, even apartments could be hiding dark secrets. The victims had walked into their rooms thinking they were private, only to discover they were actors on a stage for unseen eyes. The sense of safety, once lost, is nearly impossible to recover, and as much as the investigation tried to deliver justice, it couldn't return what had been taken. To everyone listening, these stories are not meant just to terrify but to warn. Always be cautious, always check, and never dismiss your instincts. The horror of hidden cameras is not confined to urban legends. It's real, it's happening, and it could be closer than you think. Thank you so much for joining me through these disturbing true hidden camera horror stories. Your support means everything, and by sharing these tales, we shed light on dangers that often go unseen. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, you never truly know who might be watching.